Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Inside Unreal, a weekly show where we learn, explore, and celebrate everything Unreal. I am your host, Tina, and today with me, I have the wonderful, amazing team that worked on the Dark Ruins Megascan sample. So we're going to go through, we're going to have everyone kind of introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll dig into the topic for today. All right? So to start us off, Victor, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure thing. Thanks for having us, Tina. My name is Victor Öhman, principal artist here at Epic, and on this project I was primarily art directing and helping build the environment.
Perfect. Wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much. Then next up, we've got Isaac. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Hi, everyone. My name is Isaac, and I am a senior lighting and environment artist. And for this project, I was mainly responsible for the lighting and and
The environment.
set, yeah, the environment and set dressing different parts of the environment and yeah, stuff like that.
Awesome. Wonderful. Then next up, we have Jacob. Why don't you tell us about yourself as well?
Yes, hi. Also, thanks for having me and us. Uh, I'm Jacob. I'm a senior environment artist in the same team for Dark Ruin specifically. Apart from set dressing and a bit of level design in some of the areas, I was responsible for the materials, like making sure that all of that stuff was set up, that we had what we needed. Yeah, so we can chat about that a little bit.
Awesome. And then last but certainly not least, we have Saga. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks, Tina. Thanks for having us on. My name is Saga. I'm a senior environment artist as well. My job was to help Victor's vision come to life. Victor's beautiful art direction. So I was mostly responsible here for doing like custom assets, so non-scanned stuff that we wanted to use to make this project our own. Yeah, that's me.
That's awesome. All right. Well, I don't want to take too much time talking nonsense just because there's so much to cover with this project. It is absolutely beautiful, gorgeous, and amazing. I could give so many compliments to it. We just spend the next several minutes of me saying words about it because it's amazing. But instead, we'll drop the link for it in the chat right here. So in case any of you haven't seen it before, you can go check it out. It's currently available on Fab for free. So make sure you go check that out. But to start us off, what is the Dark Ruin sample for those who might be unfamiliar with this project or a project similar to it?
Yes. What is the Dark Rune sample? It is like you said just before, it's a completely free, creative turnkey environment sample, created using some of the latest features in UE55 and using Megascans. And we created this to be used as, inspiration, as a starting point for upcoming projects or to bolster your current projects. And it was created by the special projects team, us here, and a few more people that are not on the stream that I will be talking about later. And we all love fantasy, and it was an absolutely amazing project to work on. And especially having as a goal to release it to the public for free really helped spur us on and do our absolute best. And it was just overall a really fun project. And we've already seen a lot of community stuff being created with it, relighting and even some cinematics are really cool. So it's already being put to good use. So yep, that is the Dark Ruins sample.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've loved seeing some of the stuff that folks have put together too. It's
Yeah.
been really fun. I feel like fantasy in particular is just a genre that really hits with a lot of folks. So them having this insane, huge, incredibly cinematic baseline to just play around with. I mean, there's nothing
Yep.
better than that.
Yep. I agree.
So, kind of along that similar vein, I'm curious, what was the main artistic vision behind this project and like what inspired its aesthetic and this wonderful dark fantasy atmosphere that we get to see here?
Yeah, so I've seen some comments on the the fly through video and so on that kind of guessed the inspirations. And then if you want to look at my screen share, I do have some references that we kind of helped establish the initial ideas for this, like where we wanted to work from, and like images from old Disney and Don Bluth, Gary Goldman movies. Like it's probably not shining through all that much, but like the color palette and like the sort of more like the shape language to a degree. Then we also have some stuff like we had a lot of inspirations from Lord of the Rings, um, not the animated Lord of the Rings, but the Peter Jackson ones. Also, a bunch of especially Scottish and Irish coasts and stuff like that. Because we wanted this place to feel like a desolate, nearly abandoned place of worship with a big mystery to it. Who built this thing? Who uses it? Is there anyone still around? Like, why are the proportions so like so enormous? Like, it's not us messing up, I promise. It was a deliberate design decision. Like, who built the scaffolding that's scattered all around it, outside in the crevices and on the beach and everything. So yeah, we just wanted to litter as much environmental storytelling as possible, just all over the place. And that's the end of my references there.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it does come through, especially with some of those really big Vista moments throughout the project. There's several of them. I mean, there's a lot of like little bits of storytelling. Really, you could spend so much time just exploring the sample and getting lost. But I
Yeah.
do feel like in particular, there are a few spots that's just you sit back, you look up, like in the video here, right there,
Mm.
that huge pulled back vista with the great silhouettes. I mean, it definitely comes through.
Well, I'm very glad to hear.
Can you walk us through what it's like planning for a project like this, especially, something with like a scale like that? What kind of prep goes into it before you actually build out the scene?
Yeah, that is a very good question, and it's starting any new project, regardless of scale, is equal parts inspiring and also intimidating. Like you can have an awesome idea, like yes, I want to do this, and then as you sit down, like oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? So like what I like to do and what we did for Dark Ruins was we set up a mirror board with a bunch of reference images, mood images like the ones you just saw there, and it literally made like a napkin sketch top-down layout of the entire place. Like I'm gonna show you that later. It's pretty hilarious.
On a
And then
literal napkin, I'm hoping.
no, unfortunately, but could just as well have been. And then as we started laying out, like getting an idea of the layout, we started associating these reference images with the different parts of the environment. And then, it's kind of funny, like the entire mirror board started looking like one of those conspiracy nut pin boards, where it's just like images and lines and dots and yeah, it's just madness, notes everywhere. Well, yeah, so like once we had that done, like we really planned it, like we planned this out really well, I think. Like we actually did it in the right order, which was really awesome.
You sound
Um,
surprised.
yeah. I have been known to have, yeah, no, that's so at that point we started blocking it out. Like we actually did some like literal blocks, just cubes, like to get the actual scale and the shapes of everything. We started out with a beach, like that was literally just like 3 cubes stacked on top of each other, just to get an idea of the space we were working with. And so the first couple of days didn't exactly produce any eye candy, but it was super valuable, as we finally had something to point and look at, and that would help us refine the scale and the flow of the actual environment. And once we were happy with that, it was time to think more closely about how to actually put this whole thing together. And that's where Jack McKelvey and Gabe Tandy really worked hard. There were two artists who are not in the stream, but they were very much involved with this project, especially in the beginning. So Jack focused on figuring out how to build, modules for the sort of dungeon section, and he worked on the ocean. He started working on the beach, and then we had Gabe working on like a first vertical slice, and he focused on the initial cave as you come in and look at that door. Man, I was really hoping that video looping was going to time perfectly there, but unfortunately it didn't. I'll point it out when I see it. But he started working on that, and like that actually laid the foundation of the visuals. Like it was like visual goal for everything else, pretty much. It was a very, very important step that he took there. So what else? So the question was, walk us through the planning. Yeah, and so once that was done, Jack and Gabe jumped off to another project, and Saga, Jacob, Isaac jumped on, and the four of us was just the perfect amount of people to split this environment up between ourselves. So we took this massive task of making a giant project and just split it up into smaller subcomponents, which make the whole thing way more digestible and get easier to get an oversight. So we split it up between, Saga making the custom assets, and then we split up the beach, the dungeon, and the cave amongst ourselves. So we kind of just focus on those areas until final pixels, more or less.
This is awesome. I'm like just zoned in because we've got the trailer going also while you're talking about
That's
it.
the
And
room.
so
That's the
being
room.
able to, yeah, perfect. Oh, it's so amazing. I can't think of any other words for it. I'm just like entranced, honestly. So how did you decide which Megascan assets to use and how to modify them for this specific project?
So, like, I'm very, very familiar with the Megascans library. Like we all are, because we've used them for years for like all our projects. So it was something that I had in the back of my head when I was looking for reference images. Like which images can I, achieve visually with Megascans assets? Because we scan the entire world, like, or pretty much the entire world, but like there are obviously some gaps, and like I know which assets that I prefer, like to work with that can do the job, that like to do the things that I wanted to do, like my personal preference. Like I've found suitable reference images with that in mind. Um, so we kind of cart before the horse before the cart kind of situation, where like I know the library, so I chose images based on the library. And then when I had the reference images to start building out this mood board, it was just a matter of going back to the library and curating an actual list that we imported into the project. And like a very, very key thing to do there, and I think we did a pretty good job there, is to think about reusability. Like there might be some really cool assets, but it could be one-offs. Like it could be a thing that just appears once, and you have to make that decision of like, is it worth, is the juice worth a squeeze, or do we use something that's a bit more frequently occurring? And again, like I said, I think we did a pretty good job, but even still, at the end of the project, we did some cleanup and found some one-off assets. Um, so yeah, that's how we decided which Megascans assets to use. But how to modify them. Like that was part of the early discovery. So for example, and Saga will touch, go in detail about this, but like for example, we had like a Roman column that's just like it's basically just a cube, old Roman cube, pretty much of concrete. And Gabe used that to make the gate. And that laid the foundation for Saga then when he took over. But I'm gonna shut up there and let Saga talk more about that later.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can just dive right into that section, right? I mean, what assets were unique to this project and what is the process for figuring out what those would be and implementing them across the project, especially knowing that you're going in with like, well, is it actually worth pulling this in? Should we just finagle what we have? I'm curious about the process behind that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a balance, right? It's performance, it's the project footprint, it's the it's a lot of things like and
But it also tends to be a little bit like self-curating almost. Like you start importing a ton of different assets because you don't really know what you need. And then once you start building, you see like, oh, well, I'm actually only using these 3 cliffs or whatever. And then you can slowly, like as you work on it, you can start seeing that you can remove things from the project, and then that kind of happens naturally in a way where you like
Yeah.
yeah, kind of slowly figure out what it is you actually need for a given project.
It was
Yeah,
also
like
kind
the
of personal.
metaphorical paint at the wall, thing
Yeah,
that sticks. Like we have way more assets in the project to start with. It's just like, nope, that doesn't work. Throw that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also kind of
yeah. I mean,
personal, right? Where like if you look at the area that Isaac worked in, you notice
Oh
way higher
yeah.
frequency of one particular asset that he
Yeah.
fell in love with.
Yeah. Victor has like 2 leakage decals that he uses in every project ever.
yes.
Yeah.
But we sometimes even brute force this process because at the end of the day, when we deliver this scene to Fab, for example, we need to make sure that it's cleaned up and that all of our little messes are not there in the end product because we don't want our users to open up like levels and materials and assets that are called like AG ba 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 because you quickly needed to create something temp. And in that process, we also go through our asset list and check, okay, how many times is a given asset actually used in the outliner? So even at that step, we oftentimes find like 3, 4 stones that we used like once or twice, and they don't add anything. So then we can even discuss this in the teams, like, hey, I have this thing. Is it used anywhere else? Do you think it adds anything? And if it doesn't, then okay, we can throw it out and replace it with something that we already have.
Yeah, that's awesome. And sounds incredibly overwhelming to me. The idea of going through the whole catalog and just finding like what works, and that's a lot because there's a lot of Megascans. So kudos to y'all for being able
A few.
to go through with that vision. Yeah, there's a few. But yeah, Saga, I'd love to know more about what Victor was mentioning too about like kind of some of the unique assets to the project and maybe how you went about creating those and making sure that they fit the theme and implementing those.
Sure thing. If you could switch to my screen, Dad. So I pretty much came into the project after the majority of the level was already mostly blocked out by Victor, Gabe, and Jack. And Victor tasked me with like refining the blockout areas with some final assets and some more polished set dressing. Everything we did was like in a really, really short period of time. So I had to find ways to repurpose the blockout assets in a lot of places rather than starting from scratch. I'm going to show a few of the assets I worked on and hopefully give a couple of tips for how you can integrate custom assets into a mostly Megascans based environment. So the first asset I looked at refining was this arch entrance piece, which we knew we were going to use in quite a few areas across the level. It's specifically this module over here, which I think was quite cleverly kit-bashed out of a single Roman column, as Victor mentioned, by one of our artists, Gabe Tandy. He did a great job as well of integrating it into the surrounding rock meshes, using a bunch of normal map decals of cracks, which also came from the Megascans library as well. This is the specific column, the specific Roman cube, the infamous Roman cube. It's a surprisingly versatile piece because you can get some good variety out of it just by randomizing the rotation of which side is facing the camera. This is the like final archway module I made after sculpting some shapes into the base kit-bashed archway Gabe made. And I'm just going to quickly show the general workflow for this, which is really simple. And it's what we typically do when we're modifying scans into a custom design. I used ZBrush, but you can just as easily do this in Blender or whatever software you prefer. The same general principles apply. So the first thing I did in ZBrush was to carefully rotate, scale, and position each of the individual pieces in the arch in a way that you didn't see the intersection between the discrete elements. The texture is fairly neutral, so it kind of blends pretty seamlessly on the texture side. You just need to make sure that the geometry, the faces, kind of line up flat with each other so you don't see the intersections. And it's quite forgiving as well because it is like a rock asset. It's not like a super clean, like a plaster wall or something. So it's quite forgiving in that sense. But in Victor's art direction, the style very much leaned into the whole Lord of the Rings Mines of Moria aesthetic with a sort of like inset step back layering of the carved rock shapes. He wanted some bold, angular, sharp cuts in the rock, which became the architectural defining style of all of the stone structural elements in the level. In order to start chiseling away at the scanned rocks to make a custom design, I first dynameshed all the geo to get even topology for sculpting, to get these even topology for doing the angular cuts on each piece. After the general shape was sculpted, I Z-remeshed each piece to get quad topology with subdivision levels, just to make it much easier for sculpting and in order to UV it as well. At the highest subdivision level, I could then reproject the detail from the scan texture onto the new mesh. So you get that same textile density of the scan texture on your new quad geometry Z-remeshed asset. And then once you have that, I basically just like refine the corners and get the overall surface to final fidelity. I then brought this like newly cut up mesh into the level and used crack decals and things to integrate it into the surrounding rocks and to make it appear that the archway is carved out of the same nearby stone. Here's another place where we use the exact same module looking slightly different. And this is an area that Jacob worked on, this amazing entrance piece he did. And just by virtue of the fact that different decals are used to stain the surface of the stone and give it a weathered effect, because of being being exposed to the elements for a number of centuries, it just looks entirely differently with this surface treatment.
There's also one of those. Oh, sorry. I just want to say there's one of those leakage decals that I'm.
Oh yeah, Victor's favorite decal. Yeah. And that same like inset carved stone motif is carried through on the large columns on the side as well that you can see going up the side. So same architectural language, make it all feel cohesive. To add a bit more variety to this thing, when we reused it elsewhere, I added some like vines growing up the top of a dead tree. So this shows up in an area a little bit further into the cave with a slightly different flavor to keep it from looking repetitive and boring. Here it is in that area in the actual level. So another asset I worked on after that was the sort of towering, menacing looking spikes, which in the final level we use pretty extensively. They need to hold up at both a close-up scale at eye level, but also really far away at this vast scale. So I took the base shape into ZBrush and did a refinement pass, adding chains, metal plates, bolts, things that connect the tip of the spike to the rest of the column. I imagined the builders who constructed this place having to like really aggressively hammer away at that tip piece to get it to conform to that spiky shape, hence the directional surface treatment on the spike tip. It's probably no coincidence that I was playing Silent Hill 2 Remake at the time that we were working on this level. So subconsciously, a lot of that creepy aesthetic, I think, started to show through, even though I didn't really mean for it to. Here you can see that final piece close up in the level. And again, we're using the same thing of layering up our rune decals and crack decals just to integrate it with the rock and give it a little bit more variety. I really wanted to do the chains as a spline mesh so we could have a bunch of variations of them around the level, but we unfortunately just didn't have time. The next major asset I needed to look at was this massive bridge with the same inset layered architectural style of as we saw in the archway. So I went away and sculpted this piece in ZBrush as the base for the structure of that bridge, and then brought it back to see if it would fit with the rest of the level. It was pretty important on this sculpt to add some large cracks directly into the geometry rather than relying purely on the decals, just to break the silhouette and not make it feel so perfect. Because we wanted it, this place to be perceived as this ancient and ruined stone cave. So yeah, breaking up the silhouette was key. Here you can see the final bridge with all the crumbling, decayed, integrated into the rocks, and also with the previously modeled spike piece as well added on top to make it a bit more interesting.
That one is everywhere.
This thing, yeah, the spikes. Yeah, the spike is for sure overused, perhaps. So the last custom asset I'm going to show is the fallen soldier character that you run into just inside the entrance of the cave. I didn't have as much time to work on this little dude as I would have liked, but it was a ton of fun to just bring in a little bit of that From Software, Elden Ring, Dark Souls flavor to the project with the environmental storytelling that we used him for. So obviously a big part of the inspiration was Souls-like games, which I really love, including the design on the top left by Vitaly Bolgarov for the game Mortal Shell. I just really love that like heavy iron ornate armor. I didn't want the soldier to just have traditional medieval armor, but something a bit more dark fantasy. So I wanted him to have these super heavy iron plates that were meant to protect him before he entered this really scary dungeon. I was looking at Uruk-hai armor from Lord of the Rings as well, but then also wanted to add that Baroque detailing that you see to indicate that he's a knight of high stature and not just, some old peasant that kind of wandered into this cave. I also wanted to model him in a modular way so people downloading the project could extract various parts and repose them in different ways. So you could get rid of the armor and just make a pile of bones if you wanted, as the mesh could be separated out into distinct parts based on anatomy. And each bone, I wanted to have enough detail to hold up close to camera. I modeled the skeleton and the armor in this neutral pose and then detailed out all the separate pieces and then centered their pivots and zeroed out their transforms in 3ds Max before importing them into the engine. So I basically had to like repose him into his final resting position directly in UE5 using the individual elements exported out of 3ds Max. The only pieces that wouldn't adapt to being reposed would obviously be the clothes and the chainmail under the armor plates. But after posing him, it was pretty straightforward to like bring the posed asset, export it out of Unreal, bring it back into ZBrush, do a quick chainmail pass, and then bring that back in to have the clothing align with his pose. Here's just a close-up of some of the surface treatment directly on the sculpt. I find it makes it a lot easier to basically sculpt the surface treatment directly into the high poly asset. It makes your life easier when you're doing texturing, for example, if you can just get each surface feel like its actual intended surface in the sculpt, like bone should feel like bone, heavy forged iron should feel as such, and leather and fabric should feel like they do as well before bringing them in for texturing. Here's the posed asset directly in UE5 with a couple extra details like dust, cobwebs, even some plants and mushrooms sprouting out of him, make it feel like he's been here for a really long time. Just a close-up of some different lighting.
You remember when you made that block out in like a day, and I was like, that looks great. Job's done. And then like you come back with a modular skeleton that's anatomically correct, and yeah.
No, you guys don't want to see that block out. That was terrible.
It has to be mentioned that this went way above the actual ask. Like the initial plan was maybe we just have a few bones and like a piece of armor, and that snowballed into let's have a dude in armor, but it can be really simple. And then Saga just came back 2 days later to like, yeah, so I made this entire modular thing.
It wasn't 2 days.
Felt like it. It was extremely fast. And a joy for us to kind of witness because it leveled up that section. And especially things like that in such a big environment, they help so much for scale because we can drop in wooden crates or coinage however we want in all of the corners. But you still don't have any real concrete reference for that. Like that coin might as well be, I don't know, 20 centimeters in diameter, or like 5 centimeters. And that wooden box could be 2 meters wide or 30 centimeters wide. Yeah. But as soon as you get something human in there, like it levels up the space and makes it really readable.
But so you don't know, Jacob, you don't know if this dude's 5 foot tall or 7 feet tall.
Yeah. I mean, if it's really tall, then it just levels up the rest of the environment. So I'm just still going to take it.
No, but I'm really, like you said, Jacob, like I'm really happy you made this and put him where he is because it helps so much with the storytelling because you go into this hallway and it's just enormous, right? It's like, was like 5 meters tall or something. And then you go a little bit further in and you see this little dude sitting by a rock and like, oh, wow, this really is a massive place. It's,
yeah, especially if you're playing with first person camera without like a character or a mannequin, it's really hard to tell scale for sure.
Yeah.
One last thing I wanted to show is a couple of examples I've seen online by other artists reusing some of our stuff, which made me super happy to see. Like people have gone really creative and just taken our assets, not just the character, but also the environment and just completely done their own thing with it. And I think these are a couple of really awesome examples.
This is like the thing that makes us go, yeah, okay, cool project, good project. Like that was a success. When you see other people get inspired by you having fun in the engine and coming up with something, and then people take that even like way further than you initially thought, or make it fit into their own unique thing. That's super enjoyable.
Yep. That's it for my section, Tina.
No.
That was pure polish.
Yeah, that was awesome. But I guess kind of in a similar vein to having those unique assets that you made, which were all awesome, by the way. I loved being able to kind of spy how you were really uniquely being able to reuse some of these assets, but make it feel zhuzhed up, give it life in a new way in each section there.
I'm all about the zhuzh, Tina.
Yes. As we all should be. And Victor, I feel like your favorite decal there is a paid actor in this, just saying.
It's the same one in every project, just saying.
Yep. It's that one, and it's a fiber plastic square that I'm very much in love with. Yep.
Yep.
And it's never used as a fiberplastic square, I should add. It's always something else.
Well, that's what's great about it, right? Is just
Yep,
seeing
this is
all
my
the
little Easter
unique and
egg.
fun ways. Yeah.
Yep.
It's your artist signature, shall we say,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
In a similar vein, I'm curious, were there any unique shaders or material techniques that were used to enhance like the atmosphere and the feel of the ruins?
Yes, so prepare for cognitive dissonance after just experiencing a wonderfully crafted presentation into me just rambling and potentially sharing the editor. It doesn't need to happen right now, Dan. I will give you the ping pong. But the general download is, yes, there's definitely some custom stuff in there. For the majority of assets, you can keep it really, really basic. But we just used a few tricks and additional material functions. When it comes to materials, as well as like assets and understanding what Megascans to use, we just carry a big bag of experience and sort of skills with us from previous projects. And especially with materials and lighting setups and specific sort of variation textures that we keep reusing them. They're in our old projects, and when there's something new, we just start porting that stuff over and reapplying it, which is generally great practice. You don't want to like constantly rebuild stuff. Create a library of functions that you reuse. But for the most part, it's pretty damn basic. There's some stuff, and I'll go not into too much detail on most of this. Now you can share my screen, Dan. There's something that we run into quite a lot with like scan assets, especially when they're absolutely huge. Like these cliffs, for example, they are ginormous. And you can throw in an 8K texture on there, even just from the way these assets are scanned, the resolution and the fidelity that you'll get up close aren't really that great. And especially when working for an actual game or even just a project like this where the optimization is not really the main focus, but we obviously still want to work and we want it to look nice and we want other people to be able to open it and sort of use it for their projects. You shouldn't really go about like above 4K. Probably 2K is a really safe bet because even though GPUs are getting really fast and have a ton of VRAM, it's still a big resource and you'll want to use a lot of textures for all of the different things. So internally, we ran into this issue quite a few times on, okay, how do we bring up the fidelity of these assets to match it with what's around it? So the shader that's used for this one is a bit more in depth than your usual shader. If I open this one up, you'll see a bunch of nodes and it looks a bit scary. I suggest downloading this project and taking your own time to go through it, because what it is at the end of the day is a really smart detail texture shader, if you will. So we have a few packed textures. They are using nanite displacement. It's disabled for most of the stuff that we have in the engine, but you have your normal, and then you have a color variation or roughness variation and a height in the alpha channel. And we just have a few of those, and we have masks on the meshes that are their own unique texture masks. And we use this stuff to blend these different detail textures on a really low resolution albedo basis. And you can kind of see one of those variation textures in here. It looks a bit of a mess when you open it up at first because we have the alpha channel visible. But we have to, in some cases, repack the UVs and then go in and say, okay, this would be the first surface variation, and then we'd have a different kind of surface variation and a third type of surface variation and a fourth type of surface variation. We use these 4 channels on every asset to blend different textures together. All of them are tiling, so we achieve really high texel density, even with really low resolution source textures. And this allows us to use very, very large assets. You can scale them up even more without them looking absolutely atrocious or blobby, especially when you then have them next to a ground asset that is super high resolution nanite mesh, and a lot of them stacked on top. So that probably is one of the, I'd say, bigger tricks that we use on the material side of things. But there's even small stuff in our regular master materia and just like some basic challenges in this environment, that we have a few ways of helping us through them. So in general, when it comes to material setup, I like to have more control. So the reason why this looks a bit more intimidating than just plugging 3 textures into your material output is because we want control, and I want to like have unique sections for all of my material logic. So on the left hand, for example, it's just my UV stuff, where either it's just I just have the default UVs, I don't want to do anything with that, or I want UVs with a random offset, or I want a really simple single sample box mapper, for example, if I have stuff that should project across the entire mesh and every mesh at equal scale. Then I just have my input textures, which is what everyone uses anyways. Just your classic albedo, metalness, normal, and a pack texture. And then I have my parameters in here. And Unreal has this really neat feature in UE5 that is called named reroutes. So you can create a named reroute. And then instead of having an absolute noodle salad going across your entire graph, you can just search for this. So for example, P layer and 0, and then search for tint, for example. And I just grab a new node that is still referencing whatever I do back here. So it allows me to clean my stuff up really well. And then this big function over here is still very basic. It's just your classic, oh, you're desaturating the albedo, you're adding a bit of contrast, and you're adding an intensity slider to it. And same with your normal. You use a flatten normal, invert the scalar, and then you have a normal intensity slider. It's just packed in a singular function with a few switches in there, which means that my material can stay pretty damn clean, and I know what I'm actually working on. So all of this, pretty straightforward. There are a few things that I've noticed in a lot of games, and I also do it when creating my own custom assets, which is a very slight RGB noise tint on your albedo maps. Usually, using noise and texturing is super helpful in sort of masking gradients and creating detail. And every material that you see in the real world is composed or part of some noises, one way or the other. So because we're using raw scan data where we don't really, we just get photographs, like really well processed photographs. But especially when you grab multiple biomes and you start smushing different scan assets together, it can look really weird, different details, and you kind of want to blend it some way. So something very, very subtle that we do that you'll barely able to notice is this RGB blend overlay. So if I increase this to 1, you'll be able to see that all of our assets have this really weird, well-aligned, just color noise on them that makes it kind of looks like, I don't know, it has measles or sick. But as soon as you turn it down just a little bit, and I'm not sure how well that comes across on stream, you can just get slight hue variation, like a bit of green, a bit of pinkish teals in there. And if that's on all of your asset, the image starts to homogenize. What
Jacob,
this is yes.
sorry, I just wanted to add, like, I remember we opened up the project one morning and I was like, "What? This looks better than I remember." And I just couldn't put a finger on it. I was like, "Oh, you did that thing." And that makes sense.
Yeah, it's really weird because it's very subtle. And even if you A/B it, you don't really see a big difference, but you do pick up on it in the sense that the image just looks more homogeneous.
But it's the same as certain lighting things. It's like sometimes if it starts being too attention grabbing, it's too much, right? Like you don't want people to notice it. It's just there, kind of.
Yeah, like exactly. And that's the thing with the materials for this one in general, because this scene, based on the reference, is so lighting focused. If you look at the actual albedo values, it's very monochromatic. Like we have a slight tint towards gray brown with a little bit of reds in it, sometimes even a bit of green. But overall, there's not much color pop in there, because in all of the reference, the majority of the color tone of the image was driven by the actual lighting. So if I go back to our wonderful chasm here, and I go into lit mode, like we can see, and Isaac's going to talk about that too, that all of the vibe, this like nice blue and green contrast, just comes from the lighting, and the materials kind of play a background role. And so that's something that you typically end up having to do when working with scan assets or even your own created stuff. If you go into your level and you start set dressing, sooner or later you'll start fiddling with the albedo to make something brighter or make something darker. But we still want to keep it within like albedo safe ranges. So something that isn't a part of this project anymore, for example, is a custom debug mode. Usually when I work, I live in my roughness buffer, my specular buffer, my base color buffer. And at the time, I added a few more, which just sort of overlaid safe range colors and let me really precisely work and balance the albedos together. And that just takes a little bit of time. And also why I do want to have some additional control in my materials.
When that's brought into any project, that's when the name calling starts. Victor,
yes.
What did you do?
Yes, it's very classic, and this beautifully puts me to another point is this area, for example, right? Like we're reusing kind of the same ground plane and the same small scatter stuff, and we're just jamming it into each other to create the small section here. And we wanted there to be a variation from our boring gray to something a little bit more red to bring some hue variation in there. But if you do that on one material instance, all of a sudden it breaks in a different section. And we had a few variations across the level, and it's very typical that while you're working, you just subconsciously open up like a material instance and you tweak something. It's like, oh, it looks good, and then you save, and all of a sudden you check it out. And then you submit it, and then the next morning you'll get a message from your colleague going like, this looks odd. What happened? And we turn it into a bit of a joke internally where we just lovingly scream at each other. But one way lovingly.
No, we name and shame, Jacob. We go into revision control, we check who did it, and that person gets pilloried.
Yes, fear is the best motivator.
Yes.
This is what we instill into everyone joining this team is this is no fun place. It's serious business. But like this classic issue, there's an engine feature and a material feature that I think a lot of people don't use or that it's not used enough. You can do some really, really cool stuff with it. And that's custom primitive data overrides.
Yeah.
Because even though you may want to have a lot of material instances because you need certain variation, like you can see here down there already, I have 3 different material instance variations for these 2 acids, where it's mostly about changing the base albedo color consistently. But you don't want to have 15 material instances, each with a slightly different hue or different roughness values or different normal intensities for your project. So there is something called custom primitive data overrides. If I go into the static mesh, for example, and I just search for custom prim data, you can see that there are a few channels added. And these channels allow me to directly in that assets in the primitive data of this asset overwrite material stuff without having to touch a material instance or create a new material instance. So if I go back into my base color and I add all of those channels, including my base contrast and my base HSV, which stands for hue saturation value. If I increase my contrast, you can see that all of a sudden this asset that I selected gets really contrasty in albedo, even though I didn't touch the material instances. That's magic. That's cool. And I can offset the hue. I can push it into something a bit more blue or into the different, into a different part of the spectrum. I can increase the saturation and make it look really wonky if you want like a neon green piece of ground. And I also obviously can play around with the value of the asset, which just, if I take this a bit more seriously now and don't just play around with these values, I can start actually fine tweaking this asset. So if I feel like, oh, it's a bit too bright in that area, I want something darker, I can just slightly pull this down into something that seems more appropriate for this area without having to touch or create a new material instance, which across your level will add up and cost you performance, and it's a nightmare to manage.
It bloats, yeah.
Yeah, it's insane bloat. Like I remember back when we did our first projects together, and especially since this feature wasn't a thing back in the day, um, we had gazillion material instances. And it becomes a naming nightmare because you start off with the base one and then you call the second one O2 and then you call it, well, brown variation and green variation. And this one has low roughness variation. And then you lose track and it just becomes a bit of a nightmare, especially when working with multiple people. But the same works for my roughness, for example. So if I have a puddle that sits right next to the thing and I don't have anything smart set up in the material instances or the general material logic to make the stuff wet, you can use that to duck your roughness, for example, and just make it a bit wetter. Same holds true for basically everything that is exposed with parameters. Now, this is me showing off this feature, but not explaining how that actually works, which I find really helpful when I try to learn something. So the way that this is done is you add a new parameter. Can be a 3-vector, 2-vector, or simple scalar, doesn't really matter. And the only thing that you do in here is you have this little checkbox called Use Custom Primitive Data. And you click this thing and you give it an index, which just means where it shows up in the hierarchy of different primitive data that your material has exposed. You give it a name, and then all of a sudden this is something that is exposed in your material. And you can give it a default value in here. In your actual material instance, you won't have access to this. This will only be for the custom primitive data. And the way you want to use this, for example, in my roughness offset, right in here you can see this little box. I aptly called it custom primitive data roughness offset. And the only thing I do is I grab my roughness from my material attributes and I add in this offset. So I don't want to multiply my original value that creates a bunch of weird results and unpredictable math. I just want to add to it. The same with the normal offset. And if I look at my HSV overrides, it's this little cool collapsed node just to keep it a little bit clean. If I go in here, you can see my input and my output. And the way that you use this stuff is you can just right click and you can start collapse node or expand nodes. If I go expand nodes, all of a sudden I have all the stuff back and it looks a bit like a mess. So I kind of regret doing that now. But the way that the HSV transform works is I'm grabbing my base color, and usually that stuff is being read as sRGB, or RGB rather. So it's split into red, green, and blue channel. So if I just start multiplying these unique channels, I get really weird results. So we have this cool default material function called color transform HSV. So in here, this is a bit of custom code that grabs all of the different scalars and it converts it instead of controlling red, green, and blue channel into controlling hue, saturation, value. So now I know that in here, I just plug in my color, my hue shift, my saturation multiplier, and my value multiplier. And I do the same thing with my custom primitive data overrides. And there's so many uses for this. It's unbelievable, especially when you go into material blending and like really complex material setups. This stuff, gold standard.
I have a question for you, Jacob.
Yes.
How did you decide what to put into custom prim data versus keep in the material level? Like, what made you decide I need to expose this as custom prim data?
Yes. So everything that I expose as custom prim data is already exposed on the material instance, right? So my material instance is sort of my mothership of control. This is where I, especially when it's internal projects, want to have all the stuff. And then it's just the classical thing of, oh, in a given project, what is the most often adjustment that I want to make in a material instance? So in this case, it's always usually albedo and certainly roughness in a lot of cases. But we had the UEFN talisman demo, for example, where we extensively use custom primitive data overrides. And then you look at, oh, I want wear offsets and all of that stuff. But usually it's just the basics. Like when you feel like you need to create a new material instance, for what reason do you feel like you need to create a new one? And then just using that makes it a little bit more clean. Also means that everybody can adjust acid looks to their heart's content without adding new material instances. Yeah, that's some of the broad stuff. There's some basic stuff in here like shore wetness, which is literally just grabbing the Z position of the world position node, and manipulating that slightly and blending in a darker albedo and ducking the roughness a little bit. And then we have the water shader, which is kind of an accident, if you will. So Victor started playing around with wetness, and we were looking at like all of the cool shots, especially if I go into this little dungeon over here, especially in this corner. Someone put in just like a quote unquote paddle plane into this section. We're like, that actually looks kind of cool, especially if you think about the noises that you'd hear in that environment. Like makes for cool stuff, and some caustics on the walls. Would have been a nice idea, we thought back then. And originally I just built it to create like small puddles, and we had actual quote unquote 3D water for our ocean outside. But it looked a bit more turbulent that we wanted. And Victor just asked me in one of our morning meetings while I was having a sip of coffee.
It's like, hey, slap that puddle out there.
Yes,
it's like
you were like, no, Victor, are you serious?
I was very distraught because the man just told me to grab a very expensive puddle material and slap it on everything. And so initially I thought, oh my God, that's going to be a terrible idea and it's going to look absolutely terrible. And I never want to work with that man again. But I tried it out. And at the beginning, it started to look actually kind of more what we wanted it to look like, almost dead. Like there's very little variation there. Everything is driven through normal because we didn't want to use expensive nanite displacement. But this gives it like a really eerie, almost dead look. And we get some nice stuff like caustics and like some nice ripple displacement stuff. But the material itself is very simple, but very expensive. So what it is, it's a bunch of normals that are panning across the thing at different speeds and different directions. And then on top of that, you have noises that pan over that. So you get kind of this feeling of, oh, there's a wind gust that pushes a ripple in one direction, and then another one that kind of grabs a ripple and pushes it into another direction. And that is what makes this look organic. But to be perfectly honest with you, I was looking at this and thinking, where do I get a good ripple normal map? So the normal maps used on the water are actually sand dune scans from our library that were blurred just a little bit because I didn't have the time to actually create something worthwhile.
And it's kind of hard to scan a ripple, right?
Yeah, it's terrible. I wish we had proper water scans on smoke scans. Like all of that stuff would be super helpful. But this is sort of the classical thing that all of us run into a lot, especially in this department. When using Megascans, we really start to learn how to hack stuff together and reuse things in many, many interesting ways. And this is a technique that I wouldn't advise for a game necessarily, because you have a ton of texture lookups and a ton of just math to blend all of that stuff together. And it's using the single layer water shader, which isn't really cheap to begin with. But for this scene and for the amount of place it takes up on screen, it actually worked surprisingly well. There's some issues in there, especially for the big ocean stuff, but especially if you're looking at using it for these kinds of puddles, it works really nicely. You can get some really cool, nice details in there. And then there's some basic forecut stuff, but that's it. Yeah, this is Victor just brought something up in our chat as an anecdote. Victor, I'm calling you out. There's no secrets here. all of the stuff will be exposed. The carrot for stalactite technique. There were a few projects where the reusage of acids and lack of the concrete thing that you want resulted in some people, I'm not going to name names, using carrots with a rock material.
Might have been me.
Using that as stalagmites. And it works well.
It's
like,
that
you can
meme. It's the same picture. It's
exactly. Like find the difference between these two pictures. It's the same thing. But yeah, that's like the initial material dive. Obviously, we can go into questions, but yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm never gonna be able to get the idea of concrete carrots out of my brain. It's,
there's a lot of this happening.
Oh my God. Well, thank you for walking through a lot of those shaders. And there were a few comments throughout that were hilarious. There's one in particular I gotta make sure I throw out here. Yeah, someone said they know that you're giving this information away for free, but they're stealing it anyway.
Nice. Yes, please do. Please do. Like this is how all of us learned is having someone with some experience in the industry explain what they do. Sometimes we just try to brute force it and fail until we get it right. Um, but this is cool. I like hearing that people want to steal it.
Yes.
You can just
Yeah.
take it. We give it away for free.
No, they have to steal it. That's the stipulation.
It's more fun.
Yes. Fun
Yeah,
thrill.
exactly. So another thing that came up in chat a couple times that I'd like to learn more about too is were there any specific post-processing techniques or lighting tricks that played a key role in how this all came together? I know, Jacob, you mentioned a couple times how like a lot of the color pops, for example, came through the lighting specifically, and I figured we could kind of dig into that side of things.
It's a very good thing we have a lighting artist in this call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good
Okay.
indeed.
It's weird almost, such a coincidence.
Yeah, sure. So so where to start? So we had a bit of a different approach to lighting the scene than we usually do, and that was because of a few different factors. So like in the very beginning when we started talking about this project, um, there was this idea that it's going to be a little bit more like animation focused, and that we might want to carve out like almost like stage areas in certain parts of the level, to to do maybe like cinematic stuff or something. And so then we were talking about like we might want to be able to have kind of control of the lighting in those areas without having there being any kind of global impacts. So you can jump between stages and you can move around lighting and you can jump around in the level without like the overall ambience changing, right? So we decided to go with trying to use megalights for this project, which is obviously a very cool new technology that you should check out if you have not done it. And so then we can essentially like light every room as its own stage in a way with a bunch of local lights instead of having everything be dictated by the position of the directional light, for example, which makes a lot of sense because the beach, like the image we're looking at now, that's obviously the exterior, but that's also the only exterior part of the level you have. After that, you're inside the cave. So like having to move the directional light into like some perfect position where it lights the entire level perfectly, it just becomes super complicated. So what we did instead was we kind of used the let's go to the next slide here. I prepared a little slideshow for us. Um, so we still use like the directional light, and we use the sky atmosphere system um, to set the ambience and the ambient lighting of the scene essentially, right? And I like to use the environment light mixer for this because it has all the components you need with the correct settings. So you can just add them, and then you have it like isolated into this nice little box, so it's easy to find. Then you have the little light mixer here, which is really handy when we're working with mega lights and you have a lot of different lights in the level. So we start off, even if we're lighting everything locally, we kind of still want to have like your ground truth, if you will, like your ambience, right? So you want to define that first. So I start out by adding all the components I need, the direction light, sky atmosphere, and obviously in this level we need a lot of fog because our direction is for it to be super duper foggy. And then I generally like to set like the directional light intensity to like 100,000 or 120,000 lux or something. And the reason why I like to use physically based values for that is because when we go on to define our exposure level, like because I do a lot of photography, like in real life outside of the computer, And then
real
What
life?
is that?
oh yeah.
Outside of the
What is it?
computer?
Yeah, exactly. I get to see actual sunlight, not just from
Yeah.
the directional light in Unreal.
Touch
You're
You get to
actual
see the
grass is what I'm hearing.
actual directional light.
Exactly, the one. And so like for me, it makes sense to be like if I'm outside with my camera shooting, I want to use the like the same settings that I would have on my camera. So I have my shutter speed, my ISO, or my aperture, for example, right? And if I have the light in the scene in Unreal set to like physically based values, like those values on my like in real life are the same on the and the exposure values like are the same in Unreal, so it just makes sense. I hope that explanation made sense. Um, so you can use that. You can also use like a wandering exposure, like with eye adaptation, or you could set your fixed exposure over here with the EV100. Like it's really up to you. But the point is that you set up your base lighting and then you kind of define when you have that, you define your exposure. And that's kind of where you start, right? So then you've defined your overall like global lighting. And if we move on, then so we've done that. Now we have like the overall environment and we have the overall ambience. And I usually define like the white balance as well, because that's like a nice way of getting some nice colors in there. So it's all not just like super brown. And so here, like in this big, like huge room, we kind of, like I mentioned, we kind of approached lighting each room like its own kind of stage, with its own unique lighting. But we still want to like adhere to a few principles or workflows, if you will. So I know, for example, this room that our focal point will be this door, because you come in here where we're standing now, and you're supposed to walk up the stairs, and you're supposed to walk in through this door, right? So you want to like put emphasis on that. But you also want to define your like directional light or your key light and your fill light, right? So we know that our directional, well, our key light is going to be from above, like that's going to be the kind of ambience you get from the sky and the outside. And then, as you probably saw in Victor's art direction pictures from earlier, we wanted to have this really like cool, fantastical green light from below, right? So we know that we want to have these three things. So then I start off with like adding in a little bit of light here at the top, and then to define the directionality, and then fill light from below to like carve out some nice shapes and create a little bit of that mood we see in the reference. And then I add in, well, here it's actually two spotlights to like really put focus on like we want to go to that door. That's the point of the whole image, right? And then to add in like a little bit more of extra detail. Victor's laughing.
Especially with this OSHA compliant bridge, it's very easy to be tempted to go somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. And then like as a final like detail step, because some parts of the level, well, some parts of the scene kind of blends into each other. You can see like the bridge here, for example, or the big kind of cliff thingy that's going on here. Like it's just kind of falls into some boring background. So then I add in a little bit of like rim lights here and there to just like bring some extra detail and life into the level. So that's basically the same principle we did for every single room, in a way, which was really interesting. It's not like a way we usually would have worked with this stuff, but with Megalights we kind of can actually do that. So that's super cool, and it really helps with the art direction, because the art direction is very much like we want to have like really high contrast and really like extreme highlights and like dark crunchy shadows and a lot of saturation and stuff. So this is a super fun workflow. Yeah. And you can be more subtle about it too. So out here, for example, where it's mainly like ambient light, we still want to have like a little bit more focus on the door where we want to go. So there you can add a little bit of light, and then I like to use like change the color temperature of the light as well to like break up the overall color of the scene. So here's where it's like now, and then you can see there's a tiny difference where we have like just a slightly warmer light that hits this area where it's supposed to go. So it kind of carves that area out a little bit. I don't know how well that comes across in the screen share, but it's a nice little like very discreet trick that I kind of like to use. Yeah, and in terms of post processing, I really love convolution bloom. It's super nice. So this is what you're looking at now is the standard bloom, which is like the default. And then you can switch to convolution bloom, where it really like it gives like a really nice texture and kind of we call it like personality maybe to to the bloom. You can see it in this little like emissive sphere here, and that's like a really nice trick I like to. Well, it's not a trick; it's a nice setting I like to use to bring some extra like life and quality to the image. The convolution bloom can be a little bit more expensive, so you might not be able to afford it depending on like performance-wise, depending on what uh, what project you're working on. But it's something that I think is like worth using if you can. And then there's other things like destroying the image. So this probably won't translate very well in the screen share, but like adding quite a lot of film grain and then going for this project, we went really heavy with like vignetting. So like if I switch between them, you can see that like creates like more of a focused and kind of almost claustrophobic feel to the image, which is really nice and plays really well into this whole like stylized, like over the top, contrasty art direction we have going on. So yeah, you can see that's something you should use if you want. And then like a final thing, I generally don't do this very much, but it can be pretty helpful, especially from a project like this, is to in the post-processing setting under the advanced tab under Lumen, you can boost the indirect intensity of Lumen. And yeah, like I said, I usually don't like to do this, but when we have this like very fantasy looking environment and we want to have like enhance like everything and everything has to be like kind of magical, right? Then it can be kind of nice to just brighten all the indirect bounds like to an maybe an unrealistic level, but it still like brings something extra, like some extra life and like to the scene. So that's another little trick. Yeah.
They're
So
awesome.
yeah, and then like I mean, just to go back to like using megalights and stuff like that. So there are like you should definitely, if you haven't done it, like you should definitely go in and read through all the documentation of megalights. That's pretty good, so you kind of understand the technology you're using, right? But there are certain things you should be like a little bit mindful of. Like there is like there's a limitation of like you how many lights you can have hitting the same pixel or like area on the screen, right? You can if you have too many lights that are like equally important, you can get a little bit of like blurriness or like shadow noise and stuff like that. So it's nice to be a little bit like strategical with the attenuation radius of your lights and stuff like that. So that was a thing, for example, for all these little candles over here. For example, like these blueprints all have like a point light. And had this been like a project we shipped like as a game, I probably would have removed a lot of the lights from here and just like hand placed them like myself in areas where it made sense. But since we're shipping this as like a product, it just becomes really confusing if we like have lights that aren't active in the blueprints and then other lights like in the scene. Like it, we want it to be easy for our users to just like grab a blueprint here and copy it and drag it somewhere else. Like so, but yeah, like being a little bit mindful of like the range of lights and how many lights hit a certain surface can be a good thing. And just reading through the documentation, but it's amazing technology. So yeah, pretty cool.
I think we could easily have an entire stream just about Megalites
Yeah.
optimization and balancing
Yes.
quality versus fidelity, and
Yeah.
but
there's
I
a
mean,
lot in there.
because it's also from like an artistic point of view. Like usually it just looks really kind of washed out and boring if you have 5,000 lights hitting the same area
Yeah.
in the level. Like often you want like a key light and maybe a fill light and then some kind of accent lights here and there, right? But that's, you don't want it to be like go over the top all the time. So it kind of naturally, you kind of naturally do that. But yeah, it's just a good thing to keep in
Especially
mind.
in an environment like this where there's no real artificial light. I mean, we've added a bunch of candles because we felt like it and we wanted to add like a little bit of ooh based on Victor's main idea. But yeah, especially for this environment, you can get away without it. It's actually on the reveal demo that we worked on alongside a bunch of other really, really cool and talented people for the Megalites feature. We ran into this issue from an artistic point of view because obviously we wanted to cramp in as many light sources as possible. But just as Isaac said, it very quickly turns into undefined colorless mush.
Yeah.
So balancing that when you use a feature light like Megalites,
Yeah.
keep it simple.
Exactly. And I mean, so like this is a good example of that, right? Like as I mentioned before, like often starting off with like having a very dominant light and then a fill light, like starting off with that, you get a really long way. You don't want to over in the beginning. Like it's really tempting to just add in more lights and like, add like a rim light on every single thing in the scene because you like I suppose can, but it's not necessarily that it looks good at the end of the day if you start doing that. So yeah.
Yeah. I think what I have mostly learned through these slides, especially, is that with lighting, it's the subtle things that really make it all
Yeah.
come together instead of just throwing in a bajillion lights, which is
Yeah, and
how I
also
usually approach most problems. But
yeah, and also the just balance between light and shadow and the
Yeah.
contrast.
But that was an interesting part of this project because like I said, like the art direction is so kind of, we wanted to enhance the contrast so much, like because there's obviously grading and stuff like that on top. It's such uh it's a really fun way of working with it, like kind of purposefully deviating away from any uh like like I mentioned in the beginning, like you start off with this like physically based lighting kind of as a baseline, but then you just break it, like, and you go ham and go crazy with like lights all over the place, and you just like turn it into this kind of fantasy world. It's really awesome as like a practice to do it.
yeah.
People like me
I
who
th-
often end up doing more realistic stuff to like be forced to work in this way is an amazing exercise, really, because you're forced
yeah,
to think about these things in a different way.
I think that's one of the reasons why this project was so fun for us working on it
Yeah,
because like the time period that we worked on it wasn't that long. Like that was a relatively quick. I don't want to call it a side project because it wasn't, but it was a quick turnaround for a project. But
And
it
it
was
was
incredibly
right after we finished Megalites too. So we were
exactly like
like,
we just jumped out
yeah.
the first thing, kind of done with it and kind of burned and exhausted.
Mhm.
And going into this, and we just had a blast. And looking at the lighting and the majority of the shots, and even just the shapes that Victor was aiming for, if you really look at it, it's kind of like a black and white composition study, like every single
Mhm.
area in this thing. It's you can break all of this down into super basic shapes, and it'll still work. Um, Obviously, you kind of want every art to kind of fall back to this principle, but especially if you're working a lot in the direction of photorealism and you want everything to look like it's been actually captured by an image, it kind of loses this
yeah,
just raw artistic make something look cool and striking. But the beach, for example, that's just pure silhouette. Like you could
yeah,
do this with boxes and it would look equally good because it's just all about value and directionality and contrast between shapes. And it's the same thing here. It's the same thing for the entrances, all of the rooms, the architecture. And it almost felt like just a fun practice exploration project
yeah.
where we just wouldn't carry that much burden of making it look photorealistic or making it adapt to certain technical constraints and just doing cool stuff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
One thing that's like just from like an asset creation point of view as well, that I think is pretty, like this screenshot is pretty good. Going back to like what Saga talked about, like if you take this bridge here, for example, like when you're lighting stuff, it's incredibly nice to have all this, like you can see all this like detail and beveling and stuff on all the kind of edges of everything. Like once you start doing this like detail pass, like that the mesh is made in such a way, the Saga made it in such a way that like everything catches lights really well. Like you get so much detail out of everything that is like such a thing that like it's worth like um exaggerating that even more sometimes just to like because it looks so good once you actually start lighting it like this. It's so much fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how much all of y'all are fans of each other's work throughout this too.
Is it that obvious?
It's very heartwarming.
Club of mutual
we
admiration.
love each other just a little bit. After a few years working together in this industry and going through these projects, you band together.
Yeah, definitely. I love that there's equal parts shame and love inside of this team.
You need to balance the two. If it's just love, it becomes disgustingly sweet and you get cavities. But
Yeah,
if you balance this with spite and hate, it becomes a proper
Kind of
nice
like kind of like the lighting, Jacob. You can't
yeah,
appreciate the
yeah,
light without the
Yeah,
darkness.
yeah,
exactly.
exactly. Isn't that like a Dark Knight quote or something? Yeah.
Probably.
Very poetic.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
All
It's
right, I've
our
got I've got three more questions that I've brought here, and then I figure we can hop into some that we've been collecting from chat. One super quick one that I have to throw in from chat just because it is incredibly contextually important and might be the most important question that I ask you through this entire stream, and I hope you're taking this very seriously right now. But we need to know who is lighting all of those candles.
um it's a dude named Steve. He's coming in on the weekends. Bit older dude. The rowing boat is his. Um
Oh, it all comes together. The
Yeah,
story. It's
yeah.
clear now.
was that too much lore dump? Did I ruin it, Victor?
No.
No,
That
this is
was the plan
perfect.
all along.
Okay,
That was
yes,
the first
good.
thing I asked them to do is like put a boat there. We needed some, cop out for all these
Yeah,
theories. Yeah.
yeah. It's
We need to explain all these candles, and we can only do it with a boat on the beach.
Yeah. Let's
because
not
it
talk about the
looks
magic.
cool.
Yeah.
So next question I have for y'all is what were some of the biggest challenges in creating Dark Ruins, and how did you approach and overcome them? Especially knowing that the turnaround for the project was pretty quick. Sounds like nothing was hanging you up too much if you were able to turn it around quickly, but I'm curious what may have stood out as a challenge for you.
I mean, it might sound silly, but sort of on the same note, on the note you were on, that it was a quick turnaround. Like a challenge was actually pacing ourselves because we all had fun. Everything was going smoothly, all the way along, and like we had all these ideas, and like at one point we just had to be like, all right, where do we draw the line? Like where do we stop? Like when is enough enough? Like that was actually a bit of a challenge we faced for a little while, where we like, nope, let's stop there. No, what we have is good. Let's not expand any further. Like maybe not the challenge, but it was something that popped up along the way. I'm not sure if you guys agree with that.
No,
Well, we
definitely.
just ran out the clock, right? Like time ran out.
Yeah,
Otherwise, we would have
exactly.
kept going.
Yeah.
I think
That's
another
an interesting problem to have.
like like a lighting specific challenge actually that I'm thinking of. It kind of happens when you light things like this. Is like you do run into this. I wouldn't say it's an issue, but something you need to be mindful of is like the continuity of the lighting. Like when everything is based on like the directional light, like you have this main dominant light source, so you don't really have that issue. But once you start like messing around and having different like light directions and stuff like that, if you're not careful, it can become a little bit confusing when you have like a really intense sun coming in from that direction, and then in another room it's from that direction. Like that's like a thing that can be a little bit, it could become a little bit tricky. But yeah. But again, like it's so fantasy that you don't want to overcomplicate it either. Obviously, it's yeah.
Yeah, getting into that mentality of suspended disbelief because it has to be there for the fantasy aspect. I can see that being being tricky. Well, going to the opposite side of things, what are each of your favorite parts of the project? Either from, and it can be from either like the end result of it or through the process of making it, just at any point. What's your favorite part? I'm curious.
Who goes first?
Victor, you start. You just asked.
Rock, paper, scissors it. No.
I mean, if we're talking about, on an individual level, like for me, this was the first time I was art directing a relatively big project with a relatively big team. So, like going through that process was, incredibly fun and challenging in a good way, and like just seeing ideas come to reality and turning into, something that, we're all super proud of was incredibly satisfying. And yeah, I think that was my favorite part for sure.
Awesome.
I
Who's next?
I think that kind of like I will go along with that because it's usually when we have a project, we have an art director, which is not Victor. And then the four of us work together and sort of go along with that vision. But all of us have ideas, and it's always an open dialogue. But if we really want to do like our own personal stuff, we usually don't have the resources to pull this team because we're working on actual stuff, and then we don't usually want to do private projects for additional 8 hours a day. We're past that age now, so it's having Victor's idea in there and just undiluted in a way, and just be like, okay, I'm just gonna run with it. Like Victor, tell me what you want to do. That was really fun, and it just happened to be a style and a subject matter that I really loved because the art direction offered a ton of freedom. Um, we as team were exceptionally lucky because we did have Gabe and Jack do a incredible lineup for this project. We jumped in and the layout was done. A lot of the shape language was already established. So we came and was like, okay, all of this stuff is figured out. Now we can just have fun on this pre-painted canvas. And I just really love moody and monochromatic, dramatic set pieces. There's something really cool about that. I don't like super colorful cinematography. I like moody and like tight lenses and everything feels a bit claustrophobic. It's brilliant. And so with Victor's super concise art direction, that was like on the dot what I like to work on. And it felt like a private project, like a passion project, just in between work. It was really nice.
Yeah, I think Jacob summed it up really well. Like it felt like a personal project that we happened to do for work. It was really cool in that way. I also got to give, mad props to Victor for the art direction because I think he had a really strong vision and all of us saw it like right away and there was no ambiguity about anything. It was just like, yep, this is what Victor's got in his head. Anytime we would like, make something or light an area or model something, we got very concise feedback from Victor of like where he thinks we should take it. And it was just all really seamless like that. That was cool. I think for me personally, I really enjoyed pretending I'm working on a Souls-like game and getting to work on a character for that too. That's also a dream of mine. So yeah, it was just super fun.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I appreciate that.
Oh, we appreciate you. Now, don't touch my material instances.
I was getting all sweet here. We gotta have some cast some
Yeah, there's that balance.
Yeah. It's been sour.
What about you, Isaac?
I was thinking like I don't really have anything to add. Like the other guys already said all I was gonna say. Like it's, and I already like specifically for me, like I already touched upon that. But like it's really fun to kind of have to work in like this kind of light sculpting kind of way. That was really cool. and it's something we haven't done so much in previous projects. So it was like it was really cool to like get to work in those like weird extremes of, with like what I would generally consider like too dark shadowed areas, or like too brightly colored lights. Like I would normally I wouldn't do that. So it's really cool to be like forced into that direction, because it's so much fun once you start doing something you're not used to doing. That was really awesome. So,
It's like something small to add, just for context, and this kind of shows the team dynamic really well. I mean, we already organically discussed about, oh, Victor's talking about art direction, Isaac is talking about lighting, Saga is talking about custom assets, and I'm sitting here rambling about materials. And what this it kind of developed into that over the years of this like unique skill sets within being an environment artist that complement each other within this team. But this project really hit this home in a way. Like we established these roles or like loose responsibilities where like, yes, Saga is probably by far the best of us four when it comes to just pure production art. Like he's incredibly fast. He knows what he's doing. His DCC knowledge is insane. Isaac is both artistically and technically, when it also comes to optimizing, just setting this stuff up, ideal for lighting. Like he's a like absolute nut job on that. And Victor is incredible at vision casting and just creating art. On top of all of us being relatively good environment artists. So going into this project and just having our areas assigned, but then with the specificity of like, Isaac, you do all the lighting. Saga, have fun, pick a few custom assets, and Victor could explore his art direction, sort of feeling himself out with that, and me just getting to play with materials. That was a lot of fun, and really like in this group dynamic, it works really well because we add to each other quite nicely in that regard.
Stop being so sweet, Jacob.
yeah.
I'm gonna
You were always the sweet one, Jacob.
Yeah. If the people watching would know the original quote for that Isaac dropped on me in a meeting.
Like devolution into wholesome Jacob.
Yes. I will start being grumpy tomorrow again.
Yeah.
Just for you all.
I have one final question that I'm going to save for the end of the show. For now, I'm going to go ahead and toss this over into some of the questions that we've been pulling from chat so far for y'all. First one is someone was wondering what you think the time differences between blocking and replacing cubes and gray boxing and stuff with the end assets.
Ooh.
That is a tricky question.
That's a good question.
For us, like there never was a time where we're like, okay, switch everything out, go. It was more like
it was very iterative, right? It was totally iterative. Like things incrementally improved over the course of the entire project, and there was never a like defined moment where it's like, all right, now swap out the blockouts for real stuff. It's like, oh, that gate's looking weird, let's fix it. Oh, that boat could use high res. Like it was very iterative like that.
Because you kind of start blocking things out with Megascans as you go, right? Like maybe you start with just like a plain cube, and then you replace it with a cliff, and then you add a little bit of detail to that cliff, and then you remove it because that looked pretty bad, and then you put something else in, and it's that weird cycle that goes through the entire level essentially. So it's very gradual, like.
And it's interesting because like one part of the level will evolve, and then you'll notice other parts starting to lag, and it's like, oh no, that room hasn't been touched in 2 weeks. It looks horrible. It kind of like goes room by room in that way as well.
Yeah. Kind of interesting. There's also the fractal effect, which is a bit of a running gag within our department, but it's a serious thing, which is just if you have a piece of the detail, you can copy that detail over and create something bigger. And that just like keeps stacking on top of each other. And you end up in this insane Mandelbrot kind of deal where you can start dressing up one pretty little corner in this level and get it to like second pass or third pass polish. And then you just apply what you did there to the next thing and the next thing. And all of a sudden it starts growing exponentially. And the detail you get is really really establishing itself quickly.
That's one thing we do a lot, like stealing like little micro set dressing moments from each other's areas. Like Isaac or Jacob or Victor will do like this amazing little like tiny section of cracked floor with like water going through it and like rocks placed in a perfect way. It's like, I'm going to put that in my area. And we just are constantly borrowing stuff from each other's like little nooks that we've created. And then that, as Jacob said, it becomes a fractal and spreads across the entire map.
And you also mentioned the sort of answer, I guess, give a bit of a more black and white answer, like the time between blockout and actually replacing. And Jacob mentioned second, third pass right there, a minute ago, and like that's a way we work quite a bit. Like we have passes, like we have the blockout pass, we have the first pass, second pass, third pass, final pass, and it's generally in the first pass that's where you're sort of in alpha mode, right? Where you replace everything, you have, actual assets in place of just cubes. And it's not the final stuff, but, at least there are things instead of just cubes. So I guess that would be where we actually replace it. But again, it's iteration upon iteration upon iteration after that.
Generally speaking, I think you want to get rid of like gray boxing as quickly as you can. But there's just a practicality limit, right? Because you're also waiting on content, especially if you build the content yourself and you first want to know what content do I actually need to build? Like how big is the space supposed to be? There's always this tug and pull on gray boxing. But if you have the resources and you can start throwing out the boxes and putting in actual assets, do that.
Yeah, awesome. Kind of in a follow-up to that, and I feel like you've sort of answered this mostly just through it seems like you just love the theme of this project in particular and really enjoyed yourselves. But they were wondering, how do you not get bored of placing thousands of meshes across the scene? They feel like that would get creatively draining for them, so they're curious how you avoid that yourselves.
I wrote this message or this question down specifically. I was hoping that we're going to get to that. First of all, we love our job. Like we love doing this stuff. It's a bit like playing Lego. There's always this moment where you seem to just like add stuff on top and you don't seem to really get anywhere and it's not really looking like anything and you get to this dip of the like frustration and reward curve. You're kind of down there and you're not really feeling it. But then it suddenly clicks and you realize, oh my God, you can do so much stuff. And you
find the recipe.
Yeah. And the reality for us is it's hard to stop working on these projects, especially with like a tighter deadline and a shorter notice. The balance between, oh my God, all the cool stuff that we could do, and we could do this here and this here, and the reality of we need to publish this and it can't be broken when people download it. That hits hard. Like we could have spent 3 more weeks just polishing, set dressing, and all of the dirty little corners of the thing. Just seeing something that was in your head pop up on screen is very satisfying.
Exactly.
I think we're
placing those sorry, go on.
Go ahead, Victor.
Okay, no, I just want to say, like, placing those thousands of pebbles and rocks on each other over and over and over, like you get better at it, right? So it just gets easier, and that frustration curve, gets less and less steep every single time. So
also, you can use
fun.
pack level blueprints.
Yes.
There are some ways to help yourself.
And like maybe we want to touch upon that real quick, because that's something we did when we were blocking this out. Like the first after the blockout, we started making modules like of different sized cave walls, of floors, of ceilings, and so on. And we reuse those quite a bit. And like for those who are unfamiliar with the workflow, basically you make an assembly of a whole bunch of things, a bunch of rocks. You like that pile of rocks, right? You like it looks good, so you want to reuse it. So you select everything, right click, and you create a level instance or a pack level blueprint, whatever, which one you prefer. And then you can place that everywhere. If you make a change to the original level, it's going to propagate to all the instances of that level instance. So we used that quite a bit to quickly flesh everything out. And then as everything became more and more defined, we started breaking them out into individual actors instead of level instances. So that's one way you can quickly you can get away from stacking those pebbles and rocks on each other over and over and over again.
And we definitely do like a pebble pass where it's like you go over like a little section and it's like, this looks super plain. Like, wouldn't there be some pebbles like accumulating in that little staircase there? Like add a bit more realism. But then once you've made it once, like Victor was saying, then that's a pack level blueprint and you don't need to do that pebble pass ever again. You just got the blueprint. And it's that nice piece of set dressing is reusable.
Every hour spent is an hour earned.
It's the fractal again. Like this is literally what we've been talking about. You can also, when creating the pack level blueprint or like these little debris piles, or just talking about stacking rocks, right? You can do that in a multitude of ways. You can do it manually, which gives you the most control, and especially if you want to get like something really specific, and you have the time, do it manually. But you can physics scatter stuff. Like you can just duplicate like 1,000 rocks, let them fall on a plane, remove the ones that you don't like manually, and save that simulation status, and throw all of that in a pack level blueprint. And now all of a sudden you have like 1,000 realistically scattered rocks that you can start to plop around your landscape. You can use the foliage painter. You can use PCG to scatter dynamic stuff on top. So it's really like work in shape passes. Just the same when you work with composition, work yourself from big down to small detail. Like start with big positive silhouettes, like stuff that actually contrasts against the background, where you don't care about the detail within that shape yet. Just concentrate on the outside shape. Create that stuff, see how it looks, work with that, and then, especially if it's pack level blueprint and you can add it to one and get populated to the other, start refining that silhouette and start adding more detail. And then you'll see that you get to this like super high fidelity or detail density without really feeling like you manually placed 1,000 pebbles.
I really love the idea of a pebble pass and that being like the official terminology for it.
It's official. It's like it's like, have you done your pebble pass yet? No.
It's the same with swoopiness. There are a few very secretly guarded internal terms within this team and beyond.
I almost got fired for coining that expression.
Yeah, we convinced the rest to use that word. I think we did it justice.
Yeah, I think it's established by now.
The next question I've got here for y'all is they were wondering if you could briefly discuss how you manage version control for this project. Does each artist have an assigned level to work on? Did you have assigned areas that then just came together later? Best practices you could offer, that kind of stuff.
So that is a feature that we use in the engine called one file per actor. Yeah, or external actors, level streaming, world partition, all that stuff. So basically what that does is like instead of checking out the entire level, if you move, again, a pebble, you sort of check out the pebble instead. So it's sort of actor-centric instead. So, using that, there's really no conflict. Like the only thing we need to design or assign are the areas that we work in. Like obviously there's going to be some spillover between the rooms and sections and so on, but there were really no issues. Like the only issue that can occur is like if someone, like I did today, I checked out a material by accident and Jacob yells at me.
How dare you! Release my materials!
With one file per actor, it's really easy. So was there anything else to that question?
Yeah, they were just, what do you use? Is it that like each artist has their own area that they work on that comes together later, or that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Because we use P4.
Yeah. So Perforce as the main source control backend. If you use UEFN, for example, it comes with its own thing that you can just use. And it's same principle. Like one file per actor is a lifesaver. It's the thought of having to work in discrete sublevels or actual sublevels that we don't even use anymore in that sense. That was a painful process. But since UE5, you have one file per actor systems, and that works wonders. With the areas thing, it's less of a let's not create versioning control conflicts and more of a let's not create like excess work kind of deal. Because when you have two areas and every little actor, like you can add that stuff and the level doesn't get checked out, it's just the individual actors. It's very easy for person A to work inside of the area of person B, and person B is doing the same stuff, and then both of those submit, and all of a sudden you have like a mess in that area and doubled work, which wasn't necessary. So usually we have like the big areas which we stay in the center of, and then every once in a while we do a pass of like bridging these areas. And it's not like we stick to one assigned area always. We still are human and we still like to have fun. So every once in a while, you like scoot over to Isaac's section or to Saga's section or to Victor's section and look around and grab a few pieces, and maybe you get inspired and be like, "Oh, I think a few pebbles there." A few candles. We can't just always press
Let
pebbles.
let me fix that for you.
Yes.
Yeah, you do have a habit of
Pebbles.
always flying into my areas and fixing floating stuff, which is thank you, but
Yes,
stay out.
it's the German in me. I'm very sorry.
Don't touch my pebbles.
It's, it's the ADHD scribble moment when you fly past something and you just look over again, need to do a double take, and then we're like, I need to fix that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one short answer, one for Berg to purples.
We like our pebbles.
Pebbles are the best.
Yeah.
I mean, it pulls everything together, right? It's the,
Yeah,
it's the
like
little
like
details.
yeah, pulls everything together, and you can also mask, things you messed up with. Like you can put a pebble on it. That's the
Oh
best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the classic gap hunting between
Yeah.
meshes. And a lot of these are just fixed with putting another thing on top and nobody will know.
Yeah, like I'm not gonna fix that intersection. I'm just gonna put a pebble on it. No one's gonna see it.
Next question I've got here for y'all is someone is wondering how you manage to keep a level that is this large so cohesive stylistically throughout.
I think Isaac touched, or no, sorry, it was Jacob who touched upon that. Like I think, the lack of saturation and the reusing the same assets over and over, like that, just give a lot of that for free. There's everything blends together, everything works together because most of these things we scanned were scanned in the same area. From a place in Sweden. We also use some Western cliffs and so on, but I think that helped quite a bit. It's an inherent cohesion.
I think it's also something.
Oh man, we all have opinions on this.
Yeah. I'm just gonna rehash what Saga said.
I mean, I was just gonna say one of the key thing we do all the time is like we look at the different view buffers. So like you go into unlit mode, make sure the colors are cohesive across the space. Go into your roughness buffer and check out what the roughness values are across your different surfaces. That's another way to ensure you're getting like even distribution and integration and blending across all of your different surfaces. That's one thing we do all the time.
Yeah. And what you mentioned previously was just the stealing little pretty corner set dressing pieces from each other. Like you start merging the styles together when you do that, which helps a lot. If we have kind of distinct styles between each other, like we found that they work really well together, but when we look at our projects, we can still tell the difference between a section that Isaac worked on, that Victor worked on, Saga worked on, and that I worked on. But they still feel generally cohesive. It's not a style break, it's just a different vibe. So that works already pretty well together in this team. And then when we do the little set dress stealing, that just masks it even further, and then we create this homogeneous thing. Sorry, Isaac, I interrupted you like a
No, you just said what I was gonna say.
Oh, so that's even worse. I stole your point.
Yeah, exactly. I have nothing to add.
Nothing left.
No.
I took everything.
That's okay.
So sorry.
Sit in silence for the rest of the stream.
Oh my God. Well, if you do have anything to add, please feel free. But
well, now I kind of feel like I have to add something, otherwise it's awkward.
Pressure.
Yeah, exactly. But
you don't have to.
No,
you don't have to.
Oh yeah, actually that's a good point. So like, I mean, going back to lighting again, my favorite subject. Like it's also kind of helpful to like copy paste stuff you made in one part of the level into other parts of the level. So like So if you have like a nice combination of intensity and like color temperature, for example, you instead of just setting up new lights, like you kind of start from the beginning and work your way through the entire level, and then you copy paste the same lights over and over again, because then you kind of know that everything has roughly the same color temperature and light temperature and like roughly the same intensity and all this stuff, and that in that, and then you can go back and make changes to it, obviously, but like in that way it kind of automatically becomes quite like well, you tie everything together in a pretty, and again, because like we started off this whole lighting thing with like dictating, well, setting up the base lighting and the base ambience that's like true for the entire scene. So in that way you kind of, that you get that for free, right? And then you can adjust it as you want.
Yeah, definitely. There's there's so many comments about pebbles now, and they're all hilarious.
Pebbles.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like, is the mountain just a scaled up pebble you found? The pebbles are the stepping stones you made along the way.
You would be surprised about the scaling up stuff.
Yeah. There's an Iceland scan that is, if you scale that up like 1 billion times, it's the best like distant landscape. I can't remember the ID for it, but it's amazing.
There's this the little sort of crater volcano thing.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, dude, I
exactly.
used that, we had this. I made this scene for 90 days. That is this massive Vista fantasy landscape with a bunch of like really jagged, enormous mountains. It's literally just a like 10-meter big cauldron volcano thing, just scaled up beyond any reason.
We also have like a few like snow piles that if you just throw a different material on there and stick it into fog and scale it up 50,000 times, it looks incredible. We typically use other software to do that, but if you can hack it like that,
you can, why not? I don't know. I feel like after concrete carrots, nothing is off limits anymore. Like
there's a lot of really funky stuff. I like same thing for 90 days. I think I built antennas in the distance out of gun models or something like that, and used character. So there was another scene with a fairy that was supposed to like fly into a mushroom at night, and the fairy was glowing. And I needed to find an animation for this thing, and I couldn't, like, I'm not an animator, and I didn't have time to start animating the wings and the character. So to make it look like it's something tiny flapping, I just took the running animation and sped it up, I think, 2,000 times. So it's just like this motion really quickly. And then I duped the character and made the legs stick out the back of the original one in like two different, like in a V shape. So when it's done animating, it looked like something fluttered that looked like wings. It works. Holds up in Final Pixel.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it looks beautiful, but like I can't look at it seriously knowing that.
No, it's a sprinting shaman woman, I think, from Paragon back in the day.
I'm gonna have to find it now, knowing what I know, and just and see how it changes things.
But I mean, that kind of touches on like a good thing, like an important thing, is that like quite often you can kind of, it's enough to hint at what it is you're trying to achieve. You don't have to be like super bespoke all the time. Like it's the same as the sand dunes on the water for the ripples. Like that's also like technically it's not water ripples, but it doesn't really matter, because as long as it kind of reads at it reads as what it's supposed to read as. You just need to hint at it. Like you can simplify things quite a lot if you have to, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, there's one more question from chat here I'm going to toss y'all's way, and then I have a final one for you all, and then I'll release you from sitting here with us. But this next one from chat, like, jokes about Steve lighting the candles aside. They're curious if there is like an actual story that you had in mind when building out this environment.
Yes, there is. It's like I'm sure if Jacob got his pause on this backstory, it could make something, super, super deep. But basically the idea that I had in mind for this was there was these primordial beings. They went to this island, they built this massive temple, which explains the enormous scale of the core structures of everything. And then after a while, they disappeared. I don't know why. Jacob, you're going to have to write a story for that. But those primordial beings were, obviously kind of awe-inspiring. So people started worshiping them. So they started occupying those ruins, and that explains, over time, like it kind of collapsed, and you can see out into the gorge, and you see all these little scaffold and shanty huts and everything up there. Those are the humans, and like there are some, reparations being made, and like there's the beautiful section that Isaac worked on that's in that cell, for example. Um, so that is the idea. So humans went in there after the primordial beings disappeared, and they're trying to get them back, more or less. And if you like, there is one little nerdy detail in the architecture that kind of hints at that, and that is the fact that the corridors are kind of slanted, so it's like one side is way taller than the other, and like that is in the dungeon section. And my thinking was that, the giant primordial beings walked obviously on the tall side when they were bringing their little puny humans next to them into their cells. A little bit of backstory there.
Yeah. That's a great attention to detail with some of that just going with the architecture in mind. That's really awesome.
In
All
my
right.
head, it's just Steve having a back bad and just having to walk over the thing bent over, and he just happens to be a very tall man because he needs to reach all the candles. And I'm sorry.
This makes sense. This does make
Yeah.
sense. Steve's lore expands.
Mhm.
I want to see projects from other people taking Dark Ruins as a sample and putting Steve in there now.
Oh, it's gonna happen now.
I
Yeah.
want to see that. That would make me very happy.
Yes. Someone please make Steve take a screenshot of Steve lighting the candles and tag all of us.
But if we're gonna
We
go
need to
down
know.
the if we're gonna go down the road of like things I would love to see people do with this thing, there's three things that I really either wanted to do myself or I would love to see somebody or people working on it. One is light ruins. So like take this same place and just do it. It's in sunlight and it's completely overgrown with foliage. It's not rocky.
Ooh.
So that's one. Another one is I want to see a Game of Thrones style dragon in here, like a wyvern, proper Game of Thrones wyvern in that main chasm. And then the third thing is a Diablo style isometric camera RPG. Because when you zoom out a little bit and you look at it from that 3/4 angle, it looks like way more detailed than seeing it in first person view. And it's just, yeah, always a winner, I think.
Get on
Love
it.
all of these ideas. Yeah, there you go. You all have
Yep.
your homework, everyone.
Get on it.
That does kind of beautifully pull me into the last question that I have for y'all today as well, of what are some key takeaways from this project that developers and artists can apply to their own Unreal Engine environments, in your opinion?
I think there's going to be some rehashing here. Like one of them for me is like if something feels like it's too big to uh if something is so big and insurmountable, you don't feel you're going to be able to pull it off. Like break it down into smaller tasks, and make it digestible and something you can manage. Instead of making a full environment, like okay, so work on the next room, like this, focus on that for a couple of days, and then focus on the next room. And like, oh man, the lighting is bugging me. I don't know what I'm gonna do with lighting. Well, I'm gonna let tomorrow Victor or tomorrow Isaac worry about that. Like it's not an issue for now. Like you can um yeah, split it up into smaller tasks.
Absolutely.
Yep.
think a
And tomorrow Victor
big
is always awesome because tomorrow Victor always takes care of my current problems.
yeah our tomorrow selves they're very I don't envy them, but it makes my today feel very good.
Yes.
I think
Just don't
one
think
of
about
the
tomorrow.
No, I don't. Uh, I think especially when people get this scene, I hope that it in some ways can demystify stuff because there's always this, and I felt this when I was studying and even before that, and I was looking at scenes, like I just didn't understand how some of this stuff works. And especially this scene, like there's nothing magical happening, despite the magical scenery. It's the most basic level design or environment art techniques being used, aside from some special sauce with megalites and some of the material stuff and some of the custom assets. But there are no big systems. We don't have, oh, you need a blueprint spline with incredible coding in that to make something like that work. Um, it's it's just a bunch of dumb meshes. And everyone can play Lego with that stuff. And even if like obviously it's too much work, especially for one person to go in and be like, I want to do the entire thing in a week. It's like, no, you don't. That won't work. Um, but you can grab like one little section and just like look how this thing is constructed, build it yourself, look at the lighting, look at the composition, see what makes this work, and then go from there. Like we worked on really complex technical environments where it's something where you cannot just go and tell other people, you can do this too. It's like, well, you need years in the industry and a lot of technical understanding and a lot of hedging to make this work. This stuff you can do. Um, you can rip this project apart, you can create your own sections out of it. And so for me, it was less about what we learned during the project, because this was a bit of a vacation for us in a way, and more what I hope other people can learn from it. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's no crazy PCG stuff happening in here. There's nothing super sophisticated. It's just good old fashioned environment art.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Fantastic. All right. Well, if that's everything, I want to give out one last thing. Is there any final things you want to make sure get covered? Anything you thought of that you might not have covered before we wrap up for today? Are you feeling good?
Feeling real good.
Yeah. This blast. Should do this more
Fantastic.
often.
Mhm.
Yes, absolutely. I'm taking that basically as a verbal handshake, just so you know. So
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, this was great. And thank you all so much for taking the time to chat with us today about the project, to kind of explore the thought process behind it and some of the cool tech that maybe folks might not see at first glance, but be able to dig in and hopefully be able to utilize for some of their own projects too. Cannot thank you enough, really. This was great. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was tons of fun. And of course, thank you everyone who came to watch the show as well. It wouldn't be what it is without you and your interaction and your questions and being here and being hilarious in chat. Like, I don't know what it was, but today especially, y'all were really funny. So thanks for being here and hanging out. If anyone popped in partway through the stream or missed some stuff, or even just wanted to go back and see some stuff that we went over, don't worry, because we post all of our streams in video format that can be viewed on demand on both our Twitch and YouTube channel at Unreal Engine. You can also keep up with us at Unreal Engine on all of our socials for the latest news, updates, cool stuff like that. And then last but certainly not least, if you haven't, I highly recommend that you take some time to go check out the Epic developer community. I talk about this enough, you'd think I wouldn't get caught up saying it anymore, but I still do. The EDC, much easier to say. But go check that out, because that's where we have all of our documentation for the engine. We have our forums. We have the learning library, where we have tutorials that are made by not only Epic staff, but also wonderful members from our community as well. Pretty much everything you could ever need in regards to the engine and other Epic services is available there on the Epic developer community. I had to say it once
Nailed
without
it.
fumbling to thank you. Don't worry,
Really
it's fine.
good.
First try. Right? We'll cut it in post. They just did a great first try. But yeah, make sure you check that out if you haven't already. And as always, we'll have more great streams for you next week. Keep an eye out for that. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much, everybody. One last big thank you to our wonderful guests, and we'll see you all later. Bye, everyone.
Take
Thank you
care.
for having us.
Bye-bye.
Having a good one. Bye bye.
Bye.